Hi guys, I'm LastLapLucy.
And I'm Jake Sanson.
And we are here at the Autosport show, surrounded by Formula One cars.
This year we're celebrating 75 years of Formula One and the Autosport show, and Mark Constanduros and his team have gathered some incredible cars for the entire public to see.
And we love F1 cars, so we're going to go check all of them out and we're going to tell you guys a bit about them as well.
Let's do it. So we'll start with the modern day Formula One car. This is the Haas, and this particular one is liveried in the number 87. Formula One's newest British driver and the boy wonder from Chelmsford, my boy Oliver Bearman, who's going to be full-time on the grid in 2025. Ready to see what he's going to get to do. And this gives you a real indication of just the scale of the Formula One car in 2025. It is absolutely huge, very wide in diameter. And it's going to be really interesting to see how this evolves. This is going to be the last year under these technical regulations. But it's not the only modern F1 car that we've got.
Now we come to the 2023 Williams car, and I'm so excited about this one because, as you can see, it's got the number 23 on it, which is of course my favourite driver, Mr. Alex Albon. This car to me has a lot of really happy memories because some of Alex's very best drives have come in this car, and I just absolutely love the beautiful Williams livery. And of course the Duracell battery at the top, like that is such a clever way to do branding.
So we've broken the rules a tiny bit with the next one. This is a McLaren, and it is obviously orange, but this is the modern day livery from 2024. And this is actually the McLaren from the 2022 season, which is why you've got a 2022 car with Oscar Piastri's livery on it. But I've got a sneaky suspicion that this is actually the year that this man goes for the gold.
This car tells the story of a team that rose from the ashes. It's the 2019 Racing Point. This car is a representation of the team's transformation from Force India to the Aston Martin. And in the middle of that period, we had Racing Point. To be honest, the thing you're probably going to remember this livery for, teammates crashing into each other. My favourite thing about this livery is the gorgeous, bold pink colour, which we have started to see make a resurgence with Alpine. But to me, this is going to be one of my all-time favourite liveries.
2009 up next, and we've got a Force India behind us. This is the car that Giancarlo Fisichella miraculously put on pole position up against the might of Ferrari, Brawn and McLaren at Spa-Francorchamps. He led into the first few laps, but Kimi Raikkonen managed to take his first and only victory of the season for Ferrari in 2009. A race later, Fisichella wasn't in a Force India. He was Raikkonen's teammate at Ferrari.
I love this car. So this car brings back a lot of childhood memories to me. This is one of the first cars that I remember seeing on Formula One when I was about 6 years old. This is Lewis Hamilton's McLaren from 2009. It was the year after he won his first ever World Championship. As we know, many more came along, and this forever is going to be one of the most iconic liveries Formula One has ever seen. It's so bold, it's so beautiful, and it carries immense history with it. This is a fan favourite car for so many people, myself included, and it's so fantastic to see it in person. We have Jaguar, which later became Red Bull. And this is their 2002 car, which is very special because I was born in 2000. You can see they were celebrating the Queen's Golden Jubilee in this year. And this beautiful, shiny green car was Eddie Irvine's last F1 car. So, as someone who's a younger fan of Formula One, I was born in 2002, as I've just mentioned. So, for me, these cars are all really familiar. However, we're now approaching a time that goes before I existed. And of course, we have the expert, Jake Sanson. He's going to tell us all about these cars.
Let's go back to the future, or back to the past, or yeah, you know what I mean. No introductions for this one. This is the Williams Renault FW18. It is my favourite Formula One car of all time. As a 10-year-old in 1996, I watched this car clean up on all but 4 occasions, with Damon Hill taking the World Championship, and this particular car giving Jacques Villeneuve his debut in Formula One. A year later, he would replicate his teammate to become champion. And this is an absolute icon. I adore this. And this is the pinnacle of when Williams were at their height, post-traction control. But it's not the only Williams here. What is the most technically advanced Formula One car of all time? My argument is this. This is the 1993 Williams Renault as driven by Alain Prost. This car had active suspension that could basically elevate and raise its position. And every single corner of the car would be controlled by computer. Once everything was all hooked up, you could basically get an also-ran like me to drive it, and it would still end up doing a fairly decent lap time. But to master it, you needed to be someone like Alain Prost or Damon Hill. This is a really special Williams. probably the most technically advanced F1 car they ever built. Right, Lucy, there is a Formula One team currently on the grid that is this team. Do you know which one it is? I've stumped her now.
No, I don't know.
Okay, so if we go back to the DNA, this is a Tyrrell, which then later became a British American Racing, which later became a Honda, which later became a Brawn, which then became Mercedes F1. So absolutely. So the DNA of this team is now obviously on the grid with George Russell and Andrea Kimi Antonelli. But this is the 93. Any guesses for who the drivers were? Nah, that's a bit odd. Ukyo Katayama, who was behind the wheel, along with Andrea De Cesaris. Very, very talented drivers.
I'm seeing another green car, and green is my favourite colour. So what is this?
Well, if you look on the side, it might tell you. What do you think it is?
Benetton.
No, it's a Tyrrell.
What?
In those days, United Colours of Benetton were a sponsor, not a team owner. So this is the last Tyrrell to ever win a Formula One Grand Prix in the capable hands of the late, great Michele Alboreto. Now, on the current grid, we have an American team called Haas, but back in the 70s and 80s, there were some very cool American names of teams on the grid. This one, I think this might be one of your favourites.
Yeah, this is called a Shadow.
Yep.
Like, that's so cool.
It is the Shadow. It's the 1980 car. And this one is actually driven by Jeff Lees, who experts will tell you is probably the greatest Formula One driver never to race in the FIA Formula One World Championship. He did a lot of the Aurora and British F1 series stuff and a lot of racing in single-seaters and sports cars in Japan. But if he'd have ever got his shot in Formula One, he probably could have been one of the best ever.
Okay, this is slightly more familiar territory for me because I'm seeing a big Alfa Romeo written on the side of this car. Obviously, we recently had Alfa Romeo Sauber in Formula One, but this is definitely a lot older than the Alfa Romeos I'm used to seeing. So, what is this?
Well, this is a proper Alfa Romeo. What you saw when Alfa Romeo was a Sauber was basically the name only. This is a real Alfa Romeo built in the factory with an Alfa Romeo engine, a proper Alfa. In those days, however, they weren't the most reliable of cars. Bruno Giacomelli and Andrea De Cesaris did their best to drag them to the front of the grid, and they did get a couple of front row starts and a pole position or two. Now ask any British Formula One fan, one of the greatest teams in history, and they will say Lotus. And this is the 1980 car as driven by Mario Andretti and Nigel Mansell. Gone were the days of JPS for a little while. They had a bit of a falling out with them, so it's the Essex branding, which is a very different company. The mark of the beautiful designs and the expertise of Colin Chapman is still there for all to see. It was the last little heyday of Lotus before it slowly started to fade. Only one man could really pick it up after Colin Chapman, and that was a very legendary Brazilian.
The most striking thing about this one is that front wing. That is a really interesting design.
Harvey Postlethwaite was always a bit of a different kind of guy in terms of his aerodynamic prowess. He liked to go in a different direction to a lot of the designers at the time, and it's something that was a character of Tyrrell's all the way up until their last season in 1998. Don't forget that this is the 74 Tyrrell. A couple of years later, they made a car with 6 wheels. A very, very different Formula One car. And it actually worked because the front tyres, they basically shrunk them in size to put 2 tyres on either side of half the size. But because there was more rubber actually touching the floor, it worked out aerodynamically in terms of grip. Harvey Postlethwaite was a real different kind of guy. He was a real game changer for the sport. Loved what he made with the Tyrrell. So if you guys think that Formula One drivers running their own teams is something relatively recent, well, this is Graham Hill's effort. It was known officially as the Embassy Racing Team for a certain time, and he had help from Lola to build the cars. You'll probably notice the Lola logo on the nose cone. But this is the last big effort. He was really starting to build a fantastic team until the end of the 1975 season, when rather sadly, he and his young protege, Tony Bryce, was sadly perished in an airplane accident as they were flying home from a test. And sadly, the team folded just after that incident. Had they survived, this could have been one of the great British Formula One teams. So whilst this car may look nothing like one, this is actually a Williams. It's from the 1973 season, and it was from the very early day Frank Williams trying to build up his empire in Formula One. One of the most striking things about this particular car, check out the rear end. In those days, the engine and all the components underneath the chassis were actually exposed to the elements. Just think, one sharp stone, one piece of debris that hits any of those cables, your race is over, sunshine.
So we're seeing a very old looking car here. There's definitely been a jump in probably a decade, I'd guess. It's all one colour, except for the front, which is neon orange. What's going on there?
Okay, so in those days, this is 1965, you would pull cars from the same outfit, all the same colour. So the only way to identify them was to paint the nose a slightly different tint of colour, so that you could tell from a distance which driver was which.
So kind of like how in modern F1 we have a different coloured T-cam for drivers in the same team.
Very similar concept, yeah. Now what I like about this particular car, it's the 1965 BRM. This was the star attraction in the Hollywood movie Grand Prix, directed by John Frankenheimer. So this is basically the Lightning McQueen of its day. It's such a cool, iconic car, and this one would have been driven in the movie by James Garner and Brian Bedford in a time when Hollywood A-listers would flock to go and be in a movie like that. Brad Pitt and his cronies for this year's F1 movie have got a lot to live up to. This movie is nearly 60 years old, and I don't think it's going to get beaten.
Ka-chow. Okay, this one's pretty recognisable to me. Well, I have no idea what this car actually is. I can tell it's a Lotus. That is iconic Lotus green, and the tyres as well, like yellow.
Yeah, it really stands out. It was a time when the cars were really stone personalities in terms of livery that we all scream and rave about now when a new team livery comes out. Lotus were always very distinguishable throughout the 1960s. British Racing Green, those beautiful yellow hubcaps, it was unmistakable. Mind you, this was in a period where the Lotus was a very brittle racing car. If you were a driver prepared to go hell for leather in a Lotus, you were made of very, very strong stuff. So this one is the Cooper from 1961, Sterling Moss's final full season in Formula One. A year later, he would sadly have the accident that ended his career in full-time competition at Goodwood on Easter Monday. However, this car has had quite the history. Just check out on the side how many victories it racked up, not just in the UK, but also all the way over in Australasia. Sterling Moss was formidable in a Cooper. Right, so Lucy, this is from a time when racers would race in the national colours of their country. We're in the 1950s, and if you were Italian, you raced in red, even if you raced for an Italian team. So Ferrari and Maserati both raced in the same colour scheme. And this particular Maserati, the 250F from 1957, arguably this car had the drive in the history of the sport at the Nürburgring, when 2 minutes down from the Ferraris of Collins and Hawthorn, Fangio broke the lap record more than half a dozen times to catch them up and take the victory. He said he'd never drive that hard ever again, and he was right, he never did.
Okay, we have another bright red car here, and this one even has the Scuderia Ferrari logo on it. Surely this is a Ferrari, right?
It is and it isn't. It's a weird one, this one. So this one is actually a Lancia. This is a Lancia D50 with Ferrari power. Now, Lancia kind of pulled out of Formula One in 1955 when Alberto Ascari had his monstrous accident at Monaco and then sadly perished in testing a few days later. They were so devastated by his loss that they pulled out of the sport. Ferrari, however, were going through a lean period, so they bought the design for the Lancia D50. So a year later, in 56, Juan Manuel Fangio won the title for Ferrari in a Lancia. It's all a bit complicated, but essentially, while it has a Ferrari badge, it is a Lancia. Mind you, it's not the first time that there's a Ferrari badge and it's not a Ferrari, because Ferrari used to have their badges on Alfa Romeos in the 1920s and 1930s. Sorry to confuse you all.
And that is it. We have taken a journey through Formula One's rich history. We've looked at so many different cars, from the more familiar modern ones to the old ones that don't even look like Formula One cars as they currently do.
It's really special. It's what I love about the Autosport show. You really do get to see where we've come from and how we have evolved. We've literally gone from the period of the gentleman racers through to the aerodynamic pioneers, through to the true mavericks who were basically in the depths of a blood sport, into the world of a television sport where the commercial money was really starting to creep in, to the technological hypertrain that we're on now, of seeing how these amazing advances in technology have not only been transferred to the racetrack, but to the roads that we live on now. It really is a groundbreaking look at 75 years of great motoring and motorsport. It's wonderful to look at in real terms.
Absolutely, and that takes us right back to where we started, the modern era of Formula One. And my favourite thing about this sport is that it's still unwritten. We have no idea where these cars are going to end up next. We have so many wonderful future stars that are yet to make their mark in this sport, and they are going to. And one of them is Ollie Behrman, who will be at the show on Saturday. And I'm so excited to see how he does as a full-time Formula One driver. Jake, you've been a fantastic co-host with me. I've loved learning all about these cars. It's so great to see them all lined up like this.
It's been a pleasure. This is what I really love about the sport, being able to see it and study it. And you guys get to learn a lot as we go.
So yeah, thank you for watching. Have a great day. Bye.
Donkeys are aliens, donkeys are aliens.
This is a wonderful car.
Oh yes, really, this is a wonderful